The biggest barrier to anyone who's trying to start a teaching business or start a business of any kind, or who's trying to start learning a language or start getting a job, anything like that, the biggest barrier they face is identifying the disparity in their own beliefs. Yes, it's highly psychological. So let me say it differently. In layman's terms, anybody who's trying to start something or start doing something, what's really holding them back is the understanding that they've made themselves a walking, talking contradiction. Yeah, they have. Let me explain why. Okay, what does it mean to start? Like, as a concept, how do you understand this? When someone says to you, start, what do you feel? What do they expect? Okay, just really think about that to yourself before I explain anything, because it's a completely natural, completely human thing to do, right? To want to start something. So here's another question. What's the opposite of to start? Right? That's not a difficult one either. But you see, that's another completely natural, completely human thing to do, to compare opposites. If you've got the idea in your head right now that you're going to start something, that's exactly what you're doing. You're comparing opposites. Now, is comparing opposites a bad thing to do? No. But it is a human thing to do, meaning our perception isn't always perfect. I'd say it's usually imperfect. So we need to dig a little deeper in humans to understand what exactly is going on in that thing we call a brain or a mind. All right, I hope we can all agree that our vision is not perfect. Even if we have 20/20 vision, our vision is not perfect. Since it's not perfect, we can say that it's flawed, okay? So flawed means not perfect. We can say our vision is flawed. We can say that our hearing is flawed. We can say that our bodies are flawed. So let me ask you this then. If all of our senses are flawed, and all of the different ways we take in information, they're all flawed, and our minds believe everything these flawed senses tell us, then can we say that our minds are flawed? They are, aren't they? Our brains and our minds are flawed. Why do we even need the word perception? Perception describes something that appears to be a certain way to someone. Like from the very beginning, the word perception describes something that is flawed because it only appears to be that way from one subjective point of view. If we asked other people about this perception, some may agree or some may disagree and have a different perception. And this is just a really long way of saying that our flawed perceptions lead us to understand the concept to start in a totally human way. First of all, let's just really think about what it means to start. This means we had no forward motion leading up to this point, right? We can't start if we're already going. We can't start if we've been doing something for a month or 6 months or a year. By definition, this isn't starting because we've already started and we have forward motion. And what does it mean to stop? It means that we do not have forward motion right now, but we do have the potential for forward motion. You see, when we start, we realize our potential for forward motion. Now, this is where some people get confused. When we start, we realize our potential for forward motion, yes. But remember where the potential for forward motion comes from. Where can we get more of it? We have to stop, right? We can't just start and start and start because it isn't starting if you've already started, right? The potential for forward motion is found when we have stopped, because then we can start again. So you might be asking yourself, so we need to stop in order to start? But what do I need to stop? And well, let me stop you right there. Let me stop you right there because the potential for forward motion is also a very flawed way of understanding what it means to start. Again, the concept of forward motion brings us to a comparison of opposites. The first comparison we made was between start and stop, and here we have the comparison of forward and backward. Now let's go back to start and stop. We said that stop has the potential for forward motion in it. So without stop, we cannot have a start. And we could also say that start has the reduced potential for forward motion. So without start, it's impossible for us to stop. In other words, start always has at least a little amount of stop in it, and stop always has at least a little amount of start in it. Once you understand what that means, not just in theory, but in practice, that's when your life will change. Seriously, your life will change because you'll be forced to face the logic of this simple idea. Without stop, we wouldn't have start because every start has at least a small amount of stop, and vice versa, as I've said. And what this really means for you and me and for anyone out there who's trying to start something or start doing something is that this comparison of opposites that we constantly bring up and think about is futile. 100% futile. That's our flawed human perception. You see, starting and stopping are just two aspects of the same thing. Let's call this thing starting and stopping. Okay? So now it's clear to see that start is just one part of starting and stopping, and so is stop. And here's the really big, powerful idea that you'll need to work on because you're human and so am I, and I work on it on a daily basis. Here's what it is that's going to really change your life. Starting and stopping exist without our participation. Most people call this time. So yeah, time exists and time moves forward, and we're using the concept forward just to make it a little clearer right now what I'm talking about. And later we'll speak about that concept and its opposite. But anyways, time moves forward without our participation. However, we, as the flawed humans we are, we start looking at time and drawing all kinds of lines and boundaries, and then we convince ourselves that those boundaries are real. I mean, I just walked down the street this morning and I didn't see start and I didn't see stop. All I saw was life. Like, sure, I could call whatever I saw this morning start and stop, but that doesn't mean it really exists. I saw a bird on the ground and then it flew into the air. Did it start? Did it stop? Only we as humans would even imagine to characterize this situation in such a way, because what really happened? Sometimes birds fly. Sometimes they don't. When I say that the bird started flying, it implies that some kind of decision was made. Then we could ask all sorts of philosophical questions like, did the bird move of its own free will, or did someone force it to move? But we don't need to worry about that because we understand that start and stop are human concepts. They're boundaries drawn up by our flawed perception. Now, okay, let's think about it this way. If the bird started flying, doesn't that mean that it also stopped standing on the ground? If the bird landed on a tree branch, just started standing there, doesn't that mean it also stopped flying? Do you see the disparity here? What's real and what's not real? What exists in the world and isn't just our perception? What's real is that almost every time humans draw boundaries or opposites or whatever you want to call them, they're not real. Reality is not found in duality. What I mean here is that reality is not about opposites. It's not about black and white or light and dark or day and night. Without light, there would be no way to understand what is dark, right? Dark, by definition, describes something that has less light and therefore is more difficult to see or has a different appearance. And in order to understand light, we need dark. Without dark, there's no light. So what's real is that we do not live in a world of opposites. We live in a world of complementary parts. Complementary parts, yeah. This stuff isn't difficult to wrap your head around. In order to have light, we must have dark. In order to have a start, we must have a stop. I hope we can all agree on that now because that's really the first, most basic step we need to take. Now, most people after hearing this information will start doing one of two things. They'll either start to see the opposite in everything around them. I mean, when they look at a white wall, they see black dots. Or when they start thinking about starting, they consider how much energy they have because they've stopped for so long. Something like that. Or some people just go straight to the big question that's really holding most people back, and that's, who am I? If the world is all one big thing and it's made up of complementary parts, and we can even see that each part tends to have its own complementary parts, then who am I? Am I a part? Am I a whole? Am I the entire world? Am I anybody at all? Yes, these questions come up in our minds when we try to overcome our flawed human perception. And that's fine. And again, that's completely natural. But let's not jump too far ahead because there are other elements at play here that we need to understand. It's all fine and good to just say the words and think about what it means, that light is part of dark and dark is part of light. But if we ever want to overcome our flawed human perception and really understand what's true in this world, then we need to forget that dark and light even exist as separate parts. We need to understand the one, the whole, the real concept behind this. In people, it's very easy to see the flawed perception of duality. People create or design their own persona or the way they want others to view them. With the help of the internet, this has become easier than ever before. People can literally see their own persona. And just like with opposites and other boundary lines that we draw, we convince ourselves that they exist, and we convince ourselves that this persona we've created exists. Then we go about getting other people to believe it. It's really insane when you think about it. But the majority of humans do this on a daily or maybe even hourly basis. We draw lines or boundaries and then we pretend that they're real. Now, what happens when someone points out that they're not real? Our first instinct is to fight, right? Fight or flight. Either argue and stand up for what you believe in or run away and hide. That's our first instinct when we're attacked, right? And when someone points out that our boundary line isn't right, or presents ideas contradictory to our boundary lines, we feel the need to defend ourselves. That's because every time we draw a boundary line, we actually draw a battle line. That's where we're going to battle with other people. But remember that every part can only exist as a part if it is also a complementary part of a whole. Without the whole, we don't have parts, and vice versa. So when we create this persona and we seek to convince ourselves that it's real, and we want other people to believe it too, what we've really done is we've taken this level of consciousness and split it into two parts. We've split it into two parts, yeah. One part being our persona and everything that I associate with myself and who I am as an individual. And the other part being our persona's shadow, or everything I think is bad or negative or don't associate with my desired self, who I want to be. And conflict arises when we seek to prove that one part is real and the other is not, instead of accepting them both as real and both as parts of who we are, because we ourselves are parts. I mean, good and bad, right and wrong, negative and positive. All these things are relative, and they're all part of one concept in the end. The only person who believes that they are different is the person who believes that they exist at all. A person who believes that right and wrong or good and evil exist, I mean, they exist as separate entities, not as complementary parts of one whole, that person will fight and fight and fight to try to achieve one part and try to avoid the other. It's really a fight, and for some people this fight lasts longer or is more painful than for others. And let's remind ourselves right now, who started this fight? Who really started this fight? It was the person who drew the line between good and evil. Let's use good and evil as our example because it encompasses a lot of other great examples we might want to use. Good versus evil. What about you? Are you good or evil? Are you good or evil? Don't think about it, just answer. What answer is in your heart? What answer just slips off your tongue before you can even think of anything else? Are you good or evil? You know, I've fallen into this trap many times. I've told myself that I wanted what was good and that I despised what was evil. I've believed I was doing the right thing and it just didn't work out. And I thought to myself, how can that be? I'm a good person and I'm doing good. So how can such an evil thing happen to me or someone I know? And I can tell you right now whose fault that was, that those things happened to me. It was my fault. That's when my life changed, for real. That's when my life changed. My life changed when I started understanding that everything I had in my life, my current situation, my entire history up to this point, and everything moving forward, I started understanding what it meant for me to take responsibility. All of that stuff in my past and the very place I stand right now speaking to you, That's all my doing. Nobody else is responsible for that, and nothing else has any role in that. That's all me. So it was my fault that by focusing on the good and avoiding the evil, I had created problems for myself because good cannot exist without evil. If everything was only good all the time, what would we call that? We would call it normal life. It wouldn't be doing the right thing, it would just be doing the thing. The same with evil. If we try to completely remove all evil from our lives, we are also going to lose the good in our lives because by killing evil, we're also killing its complementary part. So what happens with humans is that we create this persona to describe the positive, good attributes that we want to associate with ourselves, and we create our persona's shadow to describe the negative, evil attributes that we want to dissociate from. When we do this, when we draw this line between good and evil, and when we create this boundary that doesn't really exist outside of our minds, we've also drawn a battle line. Once we've drawn this line and started to go down the path to doing battle, it's very hard to convince us to put down our arms and to give up the fight. But once someone has been able to do it, it seems like it was the easiest thing in the world to do. These battle lines and the ensuing battles that take place because of them, they only exist because you created them in your mind. In reality, they do not exist. Now, to really understand this and how it applies to the human mind and how we can effectively change our perception, we would need to spend a very long time on some deeper concepts. And if you're listening right now, then my guess is that you want to start something. So let's review how the very basic information that we've just looked at applies to getting started. Now, we know that start and stop are two complementary parts of the same concept, and that neither can exist without the other. We also know that only one being or thing in this world has drawn the line between start and stop to differentiate them, and that is you. And we know that you've also drawn a line between your persona, or who you want to be and who you want others to believe you to be, and your persona's shadow, or who you don't want to be and who you don't want others to believe you to be. So you've drawn this line between persona and shadow, and between start and stop, and conflict has arisen. You're in the middle of an epic battle. You're fighting off ideas and beliefs that you believe are not who you are, and you're fighting to convince yourself and people around you that you are who you believe you are. You're also fighting because you believe you should start, but you're having trouble starting. That makes you feel negative about yourself. That makes you question who you are and who you believe yourself to be. And all of this stress and conflict and all these battles, they've all been manufactured by your perception. Your senses and your mind have concocted this perverted notion of who you are and who you aren't, and what it means to start and what it means to stop. And you can overcome that by breaking the disparity and searching for the whole. The whole that exists, which is larger than its complementary parts, but includes them nonetheless. That is the answer to your problem. Getting started is that simple. So to make this a little more practical and apply it directly to those of you who might be a little lost with all of the psychology and philosophy included here, or for anyone who's having doubts or anyone who still isn't clear on how to get started, I'm going to say this very clearly. Are you ready? Here it goes. If you are a person who believes that he or she needs to start, then all you need to do to start is continue. Yeah, all you need to do is continue. You see, right now, you believe that you are a person who needs to start, and you're going to fight and fight to convince yourself and other people that you need to start. But what if the answer were much simpler? Starting and stopping do not exist. They are two complementary parts of one whole. They're two sides of one concept. All you need to do is continue. When you draw the line between start and stop, you make everything rigid where it should be fluid. Time continues without your participation. So whether or not you start or stop, it really makes no difference in the grand scheme of things. The world didn't stop. You only perceive that you've stopped or that you haven't started. But in actuality, you've already stopped and you've already started and you've already continued to live with forward motion and with the potential for forward motion. And the concepts of forward and backward are equally human, so it's not important really what direction you're moving in, because all directions are just complementary parts as well, right? We can't have north without south, we can't have east without west, and time is a purely human concept too. It's also flawed. Time is the system humans have created to give meaning to life and to understand and measure length of the concept we call time. Isn't that funny? We use time to measure time. And as humans, when we measure, we draw lines. These measurements only apply to our minds and do not exist in the real world. In the real world, nothing is measured exactly because it's always in flux, it's always changing. In the real world, there's no such thing as good and evil, but only being and truth. In the real world, things do not start or stop, but instead they continue. In the real world, your persona and your shadow do not exist, and they are just complementary parts of your ego. So, if you are a person who believes that he or she needs or wants to start, then you'll never start. You have already drawn your boundary line, which is also your battle line, and you've already convinced yourself that you're not a person who continues doing things, not a person who continues making progress or even continues living. You've convinced yourself that you're a person who needs or wants to start. Basically, there are people who need or want to start, there are people who start, there are people who stop, there are people who continue. At least, that's what it probably looks like in your mind right now. In actuality, only one of these people really exists, and that's the person who continues. No one is actually starting or stopping. And while some people believe that they need or want to start, they're actually continuing as well. So my answer to you, if you're trying to get started or you want to do something in your life and you're having trouble just taking that first step, my solution is this. Understand that the person you believe yourself to be is a person who only wants to start. You do not believe that you are a person who has already started. To make this transition, you need to believe in your own heart that you have already started. You need to readjust your boundaries and your battle lines. Ideally, you need to make them disappear completely, but that takes a lot of work. So the quick fix is to understand that you are holding yourself back by continuing to believe that you are a person who wants something instead of believing that you are a person who has something. You've already started looking for the answer, right? You've already decided that this is something you want to do. You've spent time listening to me speak here, and you've probably spent time looking for answers in other places. If you've already done that, then isn't it fair to say that you've already started doing this thing? Whatever it is that you want to start, you've already started. Just by listening to me, you've already started. That guy who just wanted to start or who just needed to start, that guy doesn't exist anymore. He was really just made up by you in your own mind. And the new persona you're going to fight for has already started. So you're not getting started. You don't want to start. You don't need to start. None of that is true for you ever again. You've already started. You are continuing. If someone asks you, have you started your business yet? Your answer is, yeah, I've already started. When you talk about yourself and write posts about yourself and share information about yourself with other people, you need to tell them about this thing that you've already started. Change your online profiles to include the business you've already started. If you're trying to learn a language, the only thing stopping you from being a fluent speaker of that language is you. You see, people who are fluent speakers, they believe that they speak that language. That's the only difference between them and you. They believe it. You don't. Sure, they have lots of proof. They know lots of words and grammar, and they have people to practice with, but you know what? There are tons of people who know more words than you, know more grammar, speak with more people, and they still believe that they don't know the language and that they aren't fluent speakers. You know, I've met people who know 2,000 words and still don't believe that they are an English speaker. And I've also met people who know 200 words and believe that they're an English speaker. And both of those people were what they believed. The only difference between someone who has started and someone who has not is that the person who has started believes he has started, and the person who hasn't started doesn't believe he has started. If you've listened to me talk this whole time, or if you've only heard part of what I've said here, make sure you remember this and really take it to heart, because it will completely change your life like it did for me. A successful person believes he or she is successful, whereas an unsuccessful person believes he or she is unsuccessful. It might sound oversimplified, but it's the truth. A person who believes in these ideas and believes that they are a part of who he or she is, like it's part of their persona, that person naturally starts to change his or her behavior. They start behaving differently. They start thinking differently. Pretty soon, they don't even remember that person who only wanted to start or needed to start. They only remember this new person who they've become, who's always continuing and never starting or stopping. They understand that no one else will believe what they believe until they themselves believe it strong enough to convince other people. And in order to do that, they need to absolutely, completely, wholeheartedly believe it themselves. That's the only way change is going to happen, and that's the only way you're ever going to overcome this problem you've been facing. If you're looking for an answer about how to start something or how to start doing something, then my guess is that this isn't the first time you're looking. But let's make it the last. So remember, starting and stopping are opposites, and our flawed human perception draws lines to create opposites even when they aren't real and don't exist in reality. We then understand who we are according to these opposites and these imaginary lines that our minds have drawn, and we believe them to be true. What's more, we fight to convince ourselves and others that they are true. But we have the power to step in and alter our own beliefs, which in turn will alter our reality. Stop convincing yourself that you want to start or you need to start. If that's what you've done up to this point, if you've wanted to start, then you need to understand that you have been mistaken up to this point. You've already started. Without trying, you've started. You've searched for an answer to this problem, which means you've identified it as a problem, and you want to make a change in your life. That means you need to change who you believe yourself to be. What I want you to do right now is complete 2 exercises that are going to help you change your belief system and get moving forward on the right path. The first exercise is a personal one. I would say it involves physical elements as well as spiritual elements. The second exercise is a written one, and it involves planning and deep thinking. I've done these exercises and I've worked with other people to help them figure out their own beliefs and take control of their lives, and I can tell you that if you do these exercises, things will change for you. So what you need to do is click the link in the description. Depending on what platform you're listening to this on, the description may be above or below or on the side. Wherever it is, that's where you'll find the link to click to get these 2 exercises completely free. The link takes you to a page where you'll need to enter your name and email address. That's how I'm going to know where to send the free exercises to. So if you don't want to give me your email address or name, or for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable clicking the link, that's fine. What you've learned here is already enough for you to start taking action and to change your life. The exercises I'm offering are going to change your life long term by giving you practical tools to use when you're having trouble or doubt. So again, you'll find the link to click to get those 2 free exercises in the description section. And if you really, truly liked what you heard here and you think it's useful, share it with a friend who might be in need of this information. Share it with people who need it. That's all I ask. Let's make the world a better place together. Remember, you've already started, and you are what you believe yourself to be.